to another episode of E&Ftv's Bridging the Gap. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Daniel Peters, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Strategist. Nearly got it right, such a tongue twister that one. How are you?
I am very well. Thank you so much for having me.
And what's the difference between equality and equity?
Oh wow, you've jumped right in there. I think you didn't even give me a moment to warm up there. I think, for me, equity is about everybody having an equal piece of the puzzle or the pie. Equality comes before equity for me in that sense. And I think equity is what many organizations, as it were, no matter what the industry or sector, should be striving towards. How do you create a sense of equity within the space of your organization or business for people who come from a diverse background? So, yeah, I think equity sits for me at kind of the top of the conversation because it's what we're all striving for.
Okay, yeah, I get that. I was going to say equality, and then I saw on your LinkedIn it was equity, and I thought I must get Daniel to demystify that for me.
Well, and I think just, within that whole context, I think that we started off with equality, but equality doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has an equal piece of the pie, as I was kind of explaining before. And I think, especially when we look within workforces, it's really about that conversation around, how do we make sure that people are all different from different walks of life or different diverse backgrounds, all feel that they have an equitable stake within the business and that they're not judged differently because of their identity.
Every time I meet you, it's an education.
Well, as long as I'm saying something that's hopefully of interest, that hopefully is also thought provoking, that is my job.
Perfect link from equal pieces of the pie to equal pieces of the pizza because I always start off the show by asking five random questions that I dream up about 20 minutes before I actually hit the screen to enable the audience to get to know you a little bit better. So, and the first one is favorite pizza.
Do you know what? I'm going to be slightly controversial. I'm not like the biggest pizza person, but if I am going to do a pizza, it's going to be a mascarpone with andouille and salami. So I like it a little bit spicy, but then I like that balance of the creaminess with the mascarpone. So that's my answer.
You could tell you're sitting in London. You wouldn't find that from a northern takeaway above Watford,
But
I'll tell you that.
I equally no, I'm gonna well, like to be honest, my favorite pizza as a child was definitely ham and pineapple, and I know that it's controversial, but I will 100% stand behind a ham and pineapple pizza.
Brilliant. I love it. If you could read one book for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I could read one book for the rest of my life. Oh, do you know what? I don't necessarily read as much as I should do these days, but I'm always enthralled by books by James Baldwin. I think that the way that James Baldwin tells stories and unlocks conversations is always a great thing. So anything by James Baldwin, hopefully that's not a cop out.
Not a cop out at all. Describe yourself in three words.
Oh, I
Have I
describe
been
myself
unkind
in
to you this morning?
You are. My brain is kind of like describe myself. I don't know because I never like to describe myself, but I think I would say I am charismatic. I
Yep.
am personable, but I'm also sassy.
Okay. I like it. I like it. Well done for thinking on your feet with that one. What's your an easier one for you? What's your go-to coffee order?
I am an everyday 365 days of the year iced oat milk latte. Even in winter, I will have an iced oat milk latte, and everybody finds it so weird, but that is my go-to coffee order.
Okay, so Costa this morning, no large cups and no oat milk. And I normally
Oh.
have a large oat milk latte to go. So disappointingly, I had to switch to soya.
I've I've not even had my coffee yet. So this is probably why I was a bit like, oh my God, where are these answers going to come from?
I pity you. No coffee, and it's what? 10:30. Okay, next question. Mario or Sonic?
Sonic, Sonic,
Okay.
collecting those rings, that theme tune, the nostalgia, Sonic 100% of the way.
Yeah, I've got to agree with you there. And I sometimes ask my son to weigh in with a bonus question. And this morning he would like to know, he's 10 years old, he would like to know whether you prefer your birthday or whether you prefer Christmas.
What is, do you know what? Christmas. I prefer Christmas over my birthday, I think.
I really struggle with it. He asked me yesterday whether I preferred birthday, Christmas, or going on holiday. Honestly, I scratched my head, I toed and froed, I went this way and that. I can't remember what the answer is, but I think birthday was third. Christmas and holiday, they're so like different, aren't they? But equally kind of like magical times. It's just like, do I like being hot? Do I like being cold? Like lots of presents, or do I like a suntan? Difficult.
They've all got equal merits, and they generally center around self-joy in many ways
Yeah,
for me. So I feel like they have equal footing, but nonetheless, Christmas because of the food, the people, the time off from work, and I
yeah.
get to buy myself a present and be unapologetic about it.
Brilliant. Well done. You've survived not just five, but six questions made up off the top of my head. Sometimes they're kind, sometimes I'm evil. So tell us a little bit about you and your career so far, Daniel.
So me and my career, I'll kind of start off with the early years, I guess, which was that I always kind of aspired to be in or want to be in the performing arts world. So I studied at the Brit School for Performing Arts, with some people who have gone on to do incredible things in the music industry, for instance, or the acting world. But that was where I saw myself pursuing a career. But I quickly learned to pivot that when I kind of lost a bit of interest and passion for the industry, and then ended up falling into my second space, which was fashion. And I think, like many people who explore a career in the fashion industry at first, I, of course, wanted to be a fashion designer. And I think that's quite often because of the fact that we talk about so few different roles in the industry, but we kind of idolize the idea or the role of a designer. But I quickly learned that I didn't have at that time the skill or the talent to be a fashion designer. So I kind of found my footing in other parts of the kind of fashion world. And ultimately, when I was taking on a shop floor job at Selfridges, I decided to explore the world of visual merchandising. And so went to somebody in the VM team and said, can I work with you 1 day a week for free? And that 1 day a week for 3 months led me to a position at Burberry. And, that role at Burberry was only supposed to last for 6 weeks. And it was a job that I had zero experience for. But somebody took a chance on me. And that chance led to a nearly 4 year career producing the global events, the global showrooms, and the runway shows. And kind of those formative years of Burberry really set me up for understanding how to work in a corporate environment, also what the fashion industry is like, and what I didn't like in a way. But I've held on to various roles in fashion, and more recently, 5 years ago, set up the Fashion Minority Report or the Minority Report Group as a way to create inclusive workplace culture for diverse voices. Without perhaps jumping too far into it, I took a moment in 2020 to reflect on what my experience had been working for, many companies who had great names, but actually thinking about what was that equity piece for me in the industry. Had I had to struggle and strive in the way that I'd heard about it from other people, but then I also realized I had what I call professional privilege, and my professional privilege is the places where I've worked, the people that I've worked alongside, and the types of roles that I've had. And within all of that, I've had a sense of privilege. But it was really how could I use that privilege in a way to pay it forward for people who come from diverse communities or backgrounds, whether that be based on gender, ethnicity, sexuality, disability, socioeconomic status. So all of that combined has led me to where I am now, which is working with businesses and organizations at a foundational level, at a seniority level, to make sure that their businesses are well equipped for diverse talent, but also to support diverse talent to thrive. And then on the other side, we do a great deal of work with emerging fashion talent in particular through mentoring programs, a summer school, and an incubator.
That's really interesting. Was there any particular moment or a few different times that kind of expedited your interest in DEI? Did you observe, for instance, discrimination against you or colleagues, or where did that kind of passion come from?
So, I was saying to somebody earlier that, or yes, actually earlier today, that I never assumed or expected to go into the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I always thought that I would do something pretty creative, or a blend of strategy and creativity in the fashion world. But I'll admit that again, as I've gone through different organizations and I've seen who has been in particular types of roles, whether it's a man or a woman or based on, socioeconomic status and age and so on. I've always been very vigilant and aware of that. And where I have had an opportunity to, I've advocated for people from different backgrounds to be present and to be visible and to be in, positions of decision making. And I remember joining a tech company a number of years ago, and on my first day, realizing that our senior leadership team in this particular market were all men, predominantly white men. Nothing wrong with that, but it made me question where any other layers of diversity came into that. And the most senior woman kind of took me aside and said, like, oh no, 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 don't kind of poke that bear. Um, but for me, it wasn't a bear that needed to be poked. It was a conversation that needed to be started. Um, and, again, at different points of my career, I've always tried to, make sure in some way, shape, or form that I'm an ally and that I'm not just an ally for people who come from a similar background or walk of life to myself, because that for me would be a very narrow intersection of allyship. But again, using that word intersection, how can I look at the intersectionality of our workforces and see that actually power and seniority or hierarchy can be distributed in much better ways? And actually, how can I try and make sure that people don't get lost in the mix? Because I think, I've heard many people talk about from their own experiences the challenges that they face. And when I look at my own, again, as I say, I've had some privilege in some way, but nonetheless, I've had to go to other companies to be able to assume a different level of seniority or a different pay gap or a different pay grade, I should say, sorry. And I've equally then seen within companies that my counterparts who are doing just as good a job as myself, and that's how it's been framed. But that's great. But yes, that I've seen that they themselves have then jumped up in different ways, shapes, and forms, even though nobody's telling me that my work has been bad. So I think all of that culminated into this desire to make sure that people aren't getting left behind based on identity.
Mhm. And of course, covers all industries. And I suppose most of our viewers are from the world of hospitality, and they're probably thinking, as interesting as this is, why is a guy from the world of fashion appearing on Bridging the Gap? So I should probably explain a little bit that you and I appeared on a panel discussion together at Bankside, London, which was Luxury Hotel Symposium. And at the time, I was thinking, because you were recommended to me to be on the panel. by Carl, and I was thinking, how do I approach this? Because Daniel's not from hospitality, but it turned out to be a raging success in the way that so we were sitting on the panel, and when you started to talk to the students about DEI, I could see the shift in their posture, the move in the chair, their eyes widen a little bit, and you really captivated them, and that was lovely for me to kind of watch. Um, so you obviously struck a rapport with those students that day, and it's obviously a talent that you've got. And it's lovely to find out where that kind of came from. But what you're obviously, yes, you're a customer, but you go into different companies. What are the common things that you see that are wrong? You know, kind of if you were to name three or five things that could easily be changed to get right, but you constantly see like companies failing their employees.
Or and I think even going back to your point about, you know, the fashion guy as I kind of am, kind of coming into this conversation in particular, talking about, hospitality, I think that diversity, equity, and inclusion is something that exists across all types of businesses. The conversation is in many ways the same. I think the reality is that there can be nuances in those conversations based on a sector. But I think at its foundational level, we're all striving towards making sure that a diverse range of people have equal opportunities and that we serve a diverse profile of consumer. Most businesses are serving some type of consumer. So how are we speaking to them in a way that doesn't make them feel alienated and that makes them feel seen and visible and so on? But to answer your actual question, I think when it comes to some of the simple things that we could do better, because I don't want any organization to see that they're necessarily doing something wrong. And I say that because, again, even just with our language, it can set a kind of precedent. And so whenever I talk about DEI to people, it's never that you have done something wrong. It's just that there's always a learning. So those learnings can just be simply, how do you position yourself to, prospective employees in terms of your mission and your values, that you uphold as a company and, amongst your or across your team, because that already starts to set the intention to people who might want to come into your business about what you stand for. I think even just within the language that we use on our websites, the ways that we frame conversations about joining a business, I think that there's a richness that we can pull out because I think it starts with the storytelling element. That also comes through to who are the types of people within your business who you're profiling on platforms such as LinkedIn or on your own website to start to tell that story about what life and the culture is like within your business. And I think without doing it in a tokenistic or performative way, you can authentically start to tell those stories because, again, it shapes this narrative about the culture. I think, sticking with that train of thought about recruitment or the recruitment process, how do you make sure that different types of people are being sought out? We often hear this narrative of, well, the diverse talent aren't out there. They're not under rocks. Diverse talent are always there, always wanting, willing, and able to deliver in these roles. But are we too reliant on our biases to understand or to mitigate them, to see that there is an ability to look in other places? Because if not, we end up with this slightly more homogenous work environment and team speaking or singing from the same hymn sheet. So I think in so many ways, it's about us diversifying the ways that we look and try to find talent and bringing talent to the table. Because, even with me hiring people for my company or for our mentoring programs, we put the opportunity everywhere. It's down to that person to bring themselves to the table and to bring a version of themselves that is going to allow me or a prospective employer to understand what it is that you can bring to the team. Because, we can all talk about, or we've come from this place of talking about cultural fit. And I think that the context of cultural fit, I can understand or appreciate it. But again, we're often looking for people who we feel a kinship to. No, I don't need to feel a kinship to you. I need to know that you can come in and smash this job because you're brilliant at what you do. And I think it's, once people are working within a company, what do you do to create an environment where everybody continuously feels valued? But also, I think the biggest thing is how are we holding ourselves accountable, in particular when we're in more positions of seniority or power? How are we holding ourselves accountable to make sure that things continue and that they don't slip? And that actually I can put my hand up and say, this wasn't done as well as it could be done when it comes to DEI. So actually there's a lesson to be learned and a way to move forward.
I think the recruitment piece is really interesting. I had two ladies from Care Trade UK who were formerly employment autism on the show 6 months ago. And
Mhm.
they really opened my eyes to how differently things can work for the better. And they proposed for autistic people sending the interview questions out in advance so they can actually plan their answers, having a more detailed notes on how to actually get there, get to the place of the interview. Um, Loads and loads of things that I've never thought of. I would, to be honest, I've always been hands up, really judgy about people that when you join a call have the camera off. Like I don't know,
Mm,
they're hiding some terrible hangover or they're actually not there at all. Um, but actually, autistic people or neurodiverse people could have a problem with that whole environment of everyone kind of looking at each other on a camera and may just be more comfortable and therefore more productive by turning their camera off. All these different things had never occurred to me, and it really kind of opened my eyes. And if I extrapolate that out away from autistic and neurodiverse folk, um, I can see that kind of what you're pushing for is so far reaching and includes so much that I personally I've never even thought about. I mean, the world's come so far, hasn't it, in say 20 years. I remember starting in hospitality and having there were rules that ladies had to wear skirts and not trousers, and the
mhm,
skirt had to be to the knee. And actually, I've told this story before, but I can't remember if I told you when we met. But I was declined a first job in a hotel at the age of 18 or something like that because I had an earring in.
mm.
And they told me that like many years after. And yeah, I was then reapproached by the same company for a back of house job. Presumably that was more palatable for them to have an earring back of house, but certainly not front of house. Give me your thoughts on all that.
I think appearance is one of those things that can become a bone of contention. We set a standard when running a business in terms of saying or dictating almost um, what it means to visually represent a business. Um, but, you know, I think that those rules, which are so strict, need to be relaxed. And when I think about the world of hospitality or hotels in particular, I feel more comfortable in a Hoxton hotel because actually the staff themselves are a bit more relaxed, not relaxed to the point of it feeling too familiar, but they themselves are relaxed because of how they're dressed, how they're presented. They might have tattoos vaguely on show. They might have different piercings and so on. They might have a different hair color, which feels to some people a little bit more radical, but actually it makes me feel at ease because I feel as if there's a lack of judgment coming from anybody because actually we're all allowed to exist as our full selves. And I think, quite often, again, we've built these environments. And I can understand that there are places of fine dining and luxury hotels, and there is a particular standard that has been set, but it has been. It's not to say that it can't change and that it can't reflect a slightly different consumer. I think that when we encourage our staff to dress and carry and be a particular version of themselves, we're limiting the type of customers who can come into our environments and enjoy what it is that we have to offer. And in particular in hospitality, I don't want to have to be told that if I'm going into a particular restaurant or environment that I have to put on a suit jacket. Like that like if that's the case, then I don't need to be in that establishment because it feels as if you're trying to make me somebody who I'm not. And actually, if I am then wearing a suit jacket, are you then going to decline me because I'm perhaps wearing jeans with it and trainers? Or are you then expecting me to come top to tail, dressed in a way that you have built this narrative of what it means to be in this environment? So I think it can be so limiting, it can be so obstructive, and it breeds again this sense of exclusivity, which is actually just exclusionary. So I think in so many ways, there are different ways that we can break down those barriers and walls and still uphold a great level of service and attention to detail and care without making people be this homogenous, robotic sense of not even themselves, really.
I can think of some quintessentially English, let's call them luxury establishments, hotels in London, well-known, famous ones. I've gone as far as I can without naming any names,
Yeah.
that I've never worked for, but would have, I would imagine a certain, they would call it a standard to hit in terms of personal appearance. How do they maintain that kind of charm and that quintessential English luxury, but still move towards a more modern approach in terms of attire, in terms of personal appearance? And in your opinion, do they even want to?
I think I think to the latter, a lot of companies and organizations don't. I think that it's nice to keep a sense of glamour. When you think of some of these luxury hotels and people go for a particular type of service, but that isn't to say that I am then going to be offended if, the maitre d' or one of the service team has a tattoo. Why does that take away from my experience? Actually, it's sometimes a conversation starter. Actually,
Hmm.
it's something that allows me to feel more of a sense of being at ease than me feeling as if I need to stand on ceremony. And I think that again, you can keep the prestige without it needing to be something that can feel so stiff upper lip. And as you said, this sense of Britishness is a wide variation of cultures which come together. Britishness isn't necessarily this stoicism that we have come from. And I think that again, how do we shift mentality or thought process towards understanding that there isn't one type of way to be British? There isn't one type of way to run a business. We're all so
Yeah.
different. And the UK, and if anything, London is a melting pot for diversity.
Yeah, I mean, Britishness now is not what Britishness was in 1920, for instance.
Yeah. If it was, I probably wouldn't be sat on this call right now because I'd be working in a back room somewhere, just trying to make ends meet. Like, I
Like
wouldn't
me with my
necessarily.
earring in.
Yeah, exactly. So even within that, we can see how things generationally shift and actually how we all have had a better ability to step out into the limelight, as it were, or to step outside of where we were to be more visible and present.
Give us some concrete tips that hoteliers and hospitality companies can take away in the way that how can they create a culture which is diverse and where inclusion is actually inclusion and not just a tick box exercise. We're actively practicing what we preach here.
So I think a lot of it boils down to, you know, think people first, approaching this with a humanistic way of considering um, the best way that we can be more diverse, inclusive, and equitable. I think quite often we can look at it from a monetary value or perspective, and actually that is something also to consider because actually, if you're widening the pool, then actually you're going to hopefully bring in a more diverse consumer, and actually that's expanding your profits and your revenues. But I think, ultimately it's thinking about people first. Like, what do your employees who currently work for you feel about the environment, in particular when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And that doesn't always need to be done via a survey. Sometimes it can be a 6 monthly check-in in a kind of, round table discussion and ask people and give people the autonomy to be able to speak freely and openly without fear of judgment. And actually, how do you then take those insights that they've shared with you and actually apply them in, but back into the business? We work with organizations where, yes, we might survey, but it's all about the actionable qualities afterwards. And with, one business that we worked with recently, there was a conversation around neurodiversity, and that some employees felt that perhaps senior management could benefit from training, to feel better, to feel better equipped to be able to talk about it, to have more confidence in these things.
Mm.
And then actually, so we developed a workshop for them. And from that workshop, we're going to do another one, about something else. But how do you then share back into the business, not so that you're being patted on the back, but so the business understands, sorry, I should say, that we've heard you, we've taken it on board, we've turned this into something, and here's the outcome. Because I think sometimes it can just get lost and people then assume that nothing's been done. And again, it's like, how do we build that sense of trust with people from different backgrounds towards understanding that if they are going to share information, if they are going to give you thoughts on what it is that could make the work environment better for them, that it's actually been something that's been upheld and delivered upon. Um, I think again, looking at that recruitment process, what are those steps currently looking like, and actually how could they be improved upon? Um, you know, an interview process is a daunting experience. And as you touched upon, should you be neurodiverse or have some other thing that that is challenging you when it comes to those moments? Actually, what can we do to make sure that we remove those barriers for you? Because as much as we're interviewing a person, they in theory are interviewing us because they're making the decision as to whether or not they want to come and work for us. So I
Yeah.
think about that recruitment process. And then, you know, finally, I guess I just come back to the human first
Yeah.
approach this with an understanding that this affects people internally and externally. And are we best serving people in any of those mediums?
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking while you were chatting through that the care trade interview, what came out of that is that there's nothing that you would do for a neurodiverse person in the workplace that everyone wouldn't benefit from. And it comes back to that you were saying about the human aspect, the human element, the human first. It's just, yeah, I 100% agree with what you said. Big shout out to the Hoxton as well. You mentioned the Hoxton, but yeah, they do create. I don't know too much about their recruitment process, but they do create an environment where I think the customer, in the way that the students warm to you at that panel discussion, I think customers warm to the kind of vibe of the Hoxton quite easily. So big shout out to them as well. Um, do you see things changing for the better? Like, is there light at the end of the tunnel? How long is this going to take? And what would an ideal world look like for you?
I think unfortunately there is no end in sight because I think we always have to push for or strive for change. There is
Yeah,
always going to be something that can be bettered when it comes to this, in the same way that the conversation around sustainability since Rana Plaza, which was, I don't know, 12 or so years ago, perhaps 13 years ago now, we're still having to have this argument about, sustainability and climate change and action being something that is should be of great importance, but yet still world leaders are denying that climate change is a thing, for instance. So I think when it comes to this conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, we're at a crucial point when perhaps it needs a rebrand because it's being attacked in such a way that some people feel that it's not recognizing them, even though they're not necessarily facing challenges and problems. So I feel like the fight will never be fought, but we continue to push forward. And it's how do we bring different people to the table to just understand that we all have the ability to create change. That's the kind of biggest thing that I take on board that we all have the ability to create change. And it's not a
Yeah.
the most diverse person in the room needs to lead and drive that change because we all have a role to play, as it were. So I think, an ideal world is one in which we are all continuing to push for that change. We're all understanding and aware of the language that we're using, and that we create safe environments for people to be able to air opinions or thoughts and perspectives that we take on board, and that we're not minimizing people based on their differences. I think that that's something, well, that's a place where we've really come from. And actually, at this point in time, it's really about coming together, celebrating our differences, and not really trying to make anybody else feel like an outsider.
Do you think things will, to a certain level, naturally get better as time goes on because this generation that are graduating from university now are much more switched on to the need and possibility for a better world? Would you agree?
I think that that is definitely something we should hold on to as being a strength. But I think that we can't put, and I'm not saying that you were suggesting this, but we can't put the weight of that responsibility on their shoulders. Also because, for the youth of today, as it were, they are being given information from all avenues and angles, TikTok, so on and so forth. And there are many different things that we're trying to shield people from, rightfully so, um, but also expose them to. I think that for my generation, anybody's generation, it's about us consciously learning and being aware of the issues that are happening in the world and not being naive to them. But also making sure that we pass on good information to future generations because it helps them to form perspectives and opinions, but also to want to be strong advocates. Because I think that there is generally a notion that, again, as you say, for younger people who are coming up now, that they are of the generation who are more inclined to want to support people from diverse backgrounds. And I think that is definitely true. But I think that sometimes we can then look at it as just being something that we don't need to make sure we continue to stoke the fire of, to make sure that, you know, that that fire doesn't go out,
Yeah,
if that makes
yeah.
sense.
I think with you campaigning and banging the drum, the fire's never likely to go out. I always enjoy our conversations. So thank you so much for appearing on the show. And I can see you becoming a bit of a DEI ambassador within hospitality. You've fallen into it. You've done a panel discussion. You've done a podcast. I think this is the start of something beautiful for you and hospitality, Daniel.
I hope so. I think that, we all encounter hospitality on a daily basis. Um, and we're all we should all be aware of what the makeup of a team is when you enter a space. Where is that distribution of diversity? Are there more people from different backgrounds in particular types of roles? And actually, as a consumer, we choose where we eat and where we drink and where we sleep and so on, as much as behind the scenes we choose where we work. So I think we all have a responsibility, and I really hope to get to have more conversations and do more work in the space of hospitality. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for giving up your time. I know how busy you are today. You were sharing your schedule earlier, so I better let you crack on with your day. Thank you so much. And yeah, that's all we've got time for this week. Like and share the show because we're a power for the good. See you next week. Bye bye.
Here we go.